Welcome to The Point of View. This is your favorite current affairs show here on Channel 1 television. On The Point of View, you get the right guests, ask them relevant questions on issues that matter to you. We have a big guest tonight to look at some very important issues. Governance, our elections, and the way forward. Professor Aning gave a very important lecture at the second speaker seminar lecture organized on the 31st of August at the University for Development Studies in Tamale. And we want him to elaborate on some of the key points he raises there about building trust for free, fair, credible and peaceful elections, the role of stakeholders. He would also chime in on the Galamsey menace, which has come to a head in Ghana. Later in the show, we'll talk to two of our regional correspondents who've been following the Galamsey scourge in the Ashanti and Eastern region. Stay with us. Welcome back. So tonight we have less than 3 months to the 2024 election, and we want to speak to a man who brings a sense of history, political science, peace building and security into the discussion around the election. He was invited to deliver the keynote speech at the second speaker seminar lecture in Tamale. He said some very important things, and I'll be asking him about that. Prior to this, on the 1st of July, he was a co-presenter for a very important speech as well. That was delivered by Francis Poku, where he made some comments. I was privileged to be moderator of that event. So I've called him up today for his thoughts around the build-up to election 2024. So what are the key issues around ensuring trust, credibility, and peace for the election? Professor Aning is my guest. Prof, thanks for joining us. Good evening. So I've had the privilege of listening to you 1st July and then 31st August. So it's been two big speeches. This one you did at the UDS. What was the background? Because I sense Speaker Bagwin was there as well. What were they trying to get you to talk about when you spoke to them in Tamale a few days ago?
Well, it was about working together, building trust for free, fair, credible, and peaceful elections, the role of stakeholders. So I think basically the Right Honorable Speaker, wanted an overview of what, as Ghanaians, we needed to do, to get to this end stage of a free, fair, credible election 2024. But Bernard, my argument was very simple. We tend in this country to have this notion that getting to free, fair, credible, and hopefully acceptable electoral outcomes, I think that just happened. My argument is that they do not. That as a nation and as stakeholders, we need to be very specific in the interventions that we undertake. But even more importantly, that we work towards those outcomes. And where we see that we are going wrong, be bold enough to call out that we are doing something wrong and that we need to change it. But Bernard, the other thing about election 2024 is that for the year 2024, this is the year since Africa got independence, or African states got independence, that we are having close to 16, 17, or 18 African states having elections. To the extent that 2024 has been described as an election bonanza. But even more importantly, The Economist has concluded that many elections will be very problematic, of which most certainly the Ghanaian elections falls into that category. So part of the conversation was to say, look, what do you see as potential issue areas, and how can we deal with those issue areas?
Thank you. But one would have thought that this being our 9th election in the series since '92, we should have basically gotten to a point where we shouldn't even be concerned about these matters because we would have done it so many times. We found a way around it. How come, though this is the 9th time, these salient issues of freedom, fairness, transparency are still as core today as they were probably in 1992?
So we are voting, we are having elections. This is the 9th time, but we are not learning from the process. Actually, that every single election since 1992 has become progressively more violent, and that we don't seem to be willing or prepared to pull back from the brink. And my colleagues and I have proven beyond any shadow of doubt that there's a very positive correlation to threatening to use violence and actually being violent, and what one attains when one's party gets into power. So over the period of time, we've seen violence as a credible currency during elections. And if one begins to examine the acts of violence, the threats, the intimidation, both psychological and physical, and the posturing, it is predicated on the fact that in 2020, I think either 7 or 8 people died. There was the sacrilegious invasion of Parliament. We haven't investigated that. We haven't resolved it. So in 2024, there is the notion that we can misbehave and get away with it. My argument was that if you misbehave, history will document it. And at the appropriate time, you will be punished. But Bernard, one other thing that I sought to focus on was the issue or our self-perception of peacefulness. But since 1992, our position in the global rankings in terms of peacefulness, even in West Africa, has slipped. Meaning that this self-perception that as Ghanaians we love peace simply does not fit our position. Finally, is that Bernard, when you read the media, the Americans, particularly the African Center for Strategic Studies, is so desperate to tell us that, oh, the Russians and the Chinese are playing games with misinformation and disinformation. Too many.
I'll come to the misinformation and disinformation later. But in your presentation, you quoted 3 key things in the build-up to this election that made you concerned. Something the president said, something the Minister for Agri said, and something the opposition leader said, which you highlighted in your speech. Why did you highlight those, and why are those important for us to consider in this build-up?
Yeah. Now, as I've said earlier on, in 2012, in 2016, and in 2020, my colleagues and I demonstrated how public utterances by politicians creates a society of fear and of uncertainty. So the president stands at a place and says, how can I hand over, or I cannot hand over to someone I defeated twice as my successor. Now, that is almost encouraging people to say, we will not accept the results of the elections if the elections do not go our way. And that itself, that potential incitement to violence, I think lays the basis for what Brianna Champong, the Minister for Agriculture, subsequently says. I have said that whether the NDC likes it or not, they will never win election 2024. You can check their records. They would not win. The NPP will win the elections. The NPP exists to win elections. So we will do whatever it takes to win the elections. Once more, this phrase opens itself to all kinds of interpretations. And in a very polarized, partisan, society where people are sensitive to these statements, it creates the foundation for flouting the law and saying, but our leaders said we will win. So we cannot win because we are the incumbent party. That then lays the foundation for the opposition leader, Mr. John Mahama, to say, quote, we won't go to the Supreme Court again because we know we won't get justice. So you can see that the lines have been drawn in the sand. I will not hand over to you. You will not win under any circumstance. But I will win. And if I don't get it at the polling stage, I will also not go and seek redress because I won't get justice. Now, therein lies the concern, and I think the choice of wording from the Speaker's office about the word trust.
Wow.
Trust is predicated on the notion that you and I can have this conversation in a respectful manner, that we can disagree, and that you can tell me, look, Kwesi, after this conversation, we are still friends. We just happen to differ. And I will take your word for it because you are a man of integrity. Now, when trust is undermined in a society, it creates the basis for using alternative means to resolve conflicts and tensions, which ought not to be. So if we take Mr. Mahama's statement, the judiciary is one of the most critical institutions that should negotiate, or no, that should ameliorate tensions and resolve the difficulties that we have as societies, so they don't turn into conflicts. Now, when a large majority of Ghanaians, that is NDC supporters, follow their leaders and say, we will not go to the Supreme Court because we know the answer that we will get. And subsequently, they are questioning the necessity for signing a peace pact. Then from where I sit, in assessing and analyzing these statements, it begins to worry me. And particularly when some people also want to overlook the fact that, look, the slippage from a stable, functional society to one in which such behavior, utterances, creates fear, and therefore we slip into violence. It's a very thin line.
I have a chart you put in your presentation, the Democracy Project, where you looked at overall trust in institutions from 1999 to 2022, focusing on the EC, the courts, and the police. And I really want you to comment on this, because from what I see, trust in these three critical institutions seems to have dwindled. So for example, for 99, EC, percent who say they trust the institution somewhat or a lot was 63%. It got to a peak of 75 in 2005, came down to 67 in 2008, hovered around the 60s, and as of 2022, is 33%. Now, I want you to comment on the EC first, because I don't know, what did you make of this? Because you chose to put it in a presentation, clearly to make a point, but it seems quite serious that it is only 1/3 of the respondents who said in 2022 that they trusted the EC somewhat or a lot. How concerning is that, and what's really going on here?
Well, I think what is going on is very clear. I think the history of this EC has unfortunately been characterized by the placing of figures and statistics in the public domain, reversals and changes, and all kinds of actions that reduce people's trust or creates a perception in people's minds that what the EC says cannot be trusted. Now, on the day I delivered this speech, there was one of the deputy commissioners of the EC present, and he managed to explain some of the difficulties that people have with the EC. And it is very clear that the EC's biggest problem with the people of Ghana is its unprofessional communication outfit, unable or unwilling to respect the concerns of Ghanaians, that please talk to us in a manner that is dialogic, that is explanatory, that takes our concerns into consideration. I think the EC has not been able to do that. It's become closed up, dismissive of any suggestions. And I think we still have about 87 days for an EC that should be engaging and that should seek to assuage people's fears. Otherwise, whatever the EC does, and from the three statements I have given, and last year's conclusion from the Institute of Economics and Peace, that we are running a flawed democracy, that it creates the basis for contestation. And since people won't go to court, then we can begin to imagine where the contestations are going to take place. So there is a credibility gap here, a critical trust deficit that we need, or that the EC needs to work on. But this is a collective engagement in which you and I and others have an interest in ensuring that we can get things done and done correctly.
All right, I'll take a short break. Prof, when I come back, I would like you to comment on the courts and the police, because today there was a bar conference addressed by the President, the Attorney General, the Chief Justice, and the Bar Association. One of the key points they made was people should go easy on the courts and they should stop attacking the courts, essentially, right? And yet when I look at the charts for the courts as well, it seems like a similar story to the EC. So just hold on for a second, I'll take a breather. This is the point of view. Tonight, we're thinking around governance and the election. My guest, Professor Kwesi Aning, director, of course, he's done many things. We know him as the one who, for many years, was director of Faculty of Academic Affairs at Tech. But really, he comes to peacekeeping, peace building, training, democracy, governance analysis from a very rich background. And we are reflecting on a lecture he gave a few days ago at the UDS on building trust, letting stakeholders work together for election 2024. Stay with us. Welcome back. The point of view tonight is counting down to election 2024. My guest, Professor Kwesi Aning, who gave a keynote speech at UDS on 31st August on building trust for free, fair, and credible elections, the role of key stakeholders. Now, he's outlined some of the key stakeholders, definitely the EC, definitely the courts, definitely the police and the political parties. We'll talk about the media as well. But Prof, I'm still dealing with the Democracy Project chart. Again, I have put up the chart where, again, in 1999, 58% of the respondents said, oh, they trust the court somewhat. In 2005, the figure went all the way to 62%. Again, that was the peak. Came down to around the mid-50s. As of 2 years ago, it was just 36%. Again, is it the same issue? Because with the EC, as you said, a deputy person there was talking about communication. Why are only 1/3 of the respondents saying they trust the courts? Is it also a communication problem, or is it much deeper or different?
No. I think probably the issue with the courts is much deeper. The general perception that the court, might be tilted in a particular way. And once more, it is up to the court or the judiciary to behave and to speak in a manner that regains the trust that they had, several years ago. Let's not forget that by the time of the 1999 figure, we had just had, what, one or two democratic turnovers. You know, I mean, Mr. Rawlings was still in power in 1999, and they had about 58% trust. So I think there is a fundamental challenge here. How should public institutions whose actions and decisions contribute to building peace act in such a manner, even when their decisions don't go the way people want, that there is still an acceptance that we can trust the decisions and the actions of these institutions. And there have been quite, were I to trace the utterances of very senior people in the judiciary over time, and certainly some of the recordings that we have seen during, you know, appointment committee hearings, then it creates quite a bit of a disturbance. So for me, the almost 22 percentage points drop is quite reflective of how people think generally.
The police is the one that baffles me the most, because one would have thought that with the current IGP and the work he's doing and the way he's perceived, the police would have scored a much higher. So they had 49% in 99, 64% 2005, and then as of 2022, only 28% of the people say they trust the police. And again, we know the role they play in elections, right? They maintain civil order. So, and this is Dan Parry notwithstanding, because from where we sit, he seems to have brought a certain sense of respect back to the police administration. So what's going on with the police and this poll?
Yeah. So what is going on with the police service here? And once more, a very critical institution, because they lead on the election security task force. So by the time Dan Parry came to head the Ghana Police Service, that was what? Just before COVID. And when this was published, his reforms had begun, but probably not kicked in dramatically. You would notice that in the last 18 months or so, quite a number of key stakeholders, public and private stakeholders, have come to praise him and to say, look, you are doing well. This notwithstanding, we know from the parliamentary hearings that quite a number of people within the service are bringing up all kinds of negative complaints, criticisms, not against the service per se, but against the leadership. So whatever it is, a combination of the EC, courts, and the Ghana Police Service being the frontline agency in the election security task force means that the police service also would have to improve its communication and continue to send that message that Dr. Dan Parry has sought to create, that we will get the job done. And I think after this survey, that is when the assent by election clearly vindicated the police service in terms of the professionalism with which they worked, the number of people that were interdicted across party lines, and that can be a lessons learned. But whatever it is, there's quite a bit of work on that still needs to be done.
All right, let's talk about,
because there are loads of, can I please finish this? There are loads of bad nuts in the Ghana Police Service. Yeah. There's a long way to go.
Yeah.
But I also experienced consistently, like this young boy, Ataguna Shred, really bad character, who gives a bad name to the Ghana Police Service.
Let me end with Galamsey, because this whole week it's been the biggest topic in town, and I know you've made comments about it. You said something a couple of weeks ago that Ghana is the only country you know which deliberately poisons its own waters when they are not at war. And that was quite profound for me to hear. Now that we are building up to election and there appears to be inertia on the part of government to deal with Galamsey, what do you reckon is the problem? Because the president said he was going to put his presidency on the line to fight Galamsey, and it seems to have gotten worse. And we are 3 months to an election, and we haven't heard anything from him on Galamsey, at least in the past couple of weeks. What do you reckon is going on, and why do they seem petrified with dealing with this Galamsey that has become such a major problem these days?
Galamsey has become an existential threat to Ghana. And I want to challenge Dr. Bawumia and Mr. John Mahama to stop their campaign for one day, half a day, and for the two of them tell the people of Ghana, bring this canker that is posing a threat to our citizens that we want to govern to an end. Sign a piece of paper and to demonstrate when they come to power that they will get this done. Is it possible to hold on to suspend an election for a couple of hours? Yes. During the 2008 financial meltdown, it happened elsewhere. I think Dr. Bawumia and Mr. Mahama must demonstrate that leadership, that the country that we want to govern is under threat. Its very existence is under threat. Our cocoa is under threat. Our food chain is under threat. Babies who ought to be the leaders for the next generation are being born deformed. But we are also seeing that those who invest in the Galamsey are no more ordinary Ghanaians. It's big business from outside Ghana. We cannot always trace those who are buying the gold. We are not always too sure where it goes to. So we cannot be so driven by power that we don't want to protect the very entity that we are fighting over. And I think the two gentlemen should demonstrate leadership by coming together and calling for concerted action. I mean, I read the Minister for Lands, some call for emergency meeting with 16 ministries. And I'm asking myself, so all these ministers, when they travel around Ghana and fly, don't they ever look out of their window? Don't they see what is going on? Does it need a societal uprising before they promise to do anything? 87 days before the election, nothing will be done, Bernard.
You've given me a lot to think about, but I want to take a break and end with traditional leadership, because we seem to be seeing an increasing role in the public sphere of traditional leaders. So I want to take your view on that and then take your recommendations when we come back. So stay with us. This is The Point of View. We'll be right back.